OK, let's get into a bit of a political head-to-head now. Let's have a debate, shall we? And welcome aboard HMS Common Sense, Sebastian, Salek, into the Lions Pit, Labour councillor and commentator. We always appreciate you. Brilliant value, Seb. And also joined by Sunil Sharma, host of Rational Voices with Sunil. Now, normally when you're in the studio together, I don't know if you've ever been in the studio together, but when the head-to-head happens in the studio, I like you to look at each other lovingly and shake hands. So if, Sunil, you could look to your right and Sebastian to your left, does that work? Or are you looking opposite directions? No, other direction, Sebastian. There you go. And yeah, same direction you had before, Sunil. There you go, smile, wave on the screen, wave at each other. Oh, well, there you go. It's almost as good as shaking hands there. We've done it. We've done our niceties. OK, let's talk about this potential class war. Apparently, I don't know whether it's a confected story, but the lurch for the left that is supposed to happen. Now, Morgan McSweeney has been removed from his position of influence. Seems to have been kick-started with Starmer saying, I'm a working class Prime Minister. Sebastian, let's start with you. Is he working class? Does it even matter?
I think he is working class, and a lot of it is to do with how you feel. There's no definition of working class, is there? But by many counts, he is. He's talked about his parents' jobs quite a lot. We don't need to go over that again, but even by that definition, he would count as working class. And look, I think there are many people who identify like that. There are many people who want to see those who are working hard, and also those who perhaps don't earn as much as others see the majority of the political attention in this country. So I think it's probably a good place to focus.
Sunil, working class or speaking out of his posterior?
I think, like you mentioned earlier, Alex, it's really hard to define what working class is anymore. I just think with him, a probably more important question is, does he represent the majority of Britain? Does he understand the average Brit in the country? And I think that answer is a pretty resounding no. I don't think he actually understands or has been around ordinary Brits across the country, understands what's important to them. And you can kind of see that with the policies that his government are making. It feels like on a day-to-day basis, there's nothing he does that is in the interest of the average Brit. So I think that's probably a more important questions. Like you both mentioned, working class just seems to be up for grabs in terms of how you define it. But I think the bigger question is, does he represent the average Brit in the United Kingdom? And I think the answer is a definite no.
Let's go back to that then, because I was listening to the Today programme a couple of days ago, and there were two people discussing Morgan McSweeney leaving. One was Lord Finkelstein, I suppose representing the right wing of that debate, and the other was John McTernan, who used to be an aide to Labour Prime Ministers. And John McTernan said on air, well, good. Now McSweeney is gone, who was obsessed with trying to chase the reform vote, i.e. the Red Wall, the Labour Party who now would back Farage, which I would probably categorise as the working class. He said, well, good, we can now focus on our core vote, which is metropolitans, minority communities. He actually said metropolitan, white-collar workers, which isn't the working class at all. I mean, working class people, I think, are most exercised by the massive changing demographics of their communities and the fact that they're being taxed a lot more. They don't have any disposable income. And yet these are two things that the Labour Party appear not to be being very successful at dealing with.
Is that one for me?
Yes, that was to you, Sebastian.
Yeah, look, I think on this basis, there is an electoral strategy here where you can coalesce the left, can't you? Because I think the next election is probably looking like the do we go for Farage or do we not go for Farage election? And there's probably a big enough coalition that can bandy together and keep him out of Downing Street. Now, look, that means speaking to the left. So that means making the positive case for immigration, for example. And I think there are a lot of people who want to hear that. If you look at where the voter flows have gone away from Labour, a lot more of them from the research I've seen have gone to the Greens, to the Lib Dems, than have gone to Reform. So it's about winning those people back as well. And that may not be what a lot of your viewers want to hear. And look, I know there are legitimate concerns about immigration, and you have to acknowledge those as well. But there is also a positive case to be made, and I would like to see a Labour government doing that.
Interesting. Sunil, you see, this is exactly what I think is interesting. You know, when you do look at the country, this has traditionally happened across various eras. If you stuck together all the votes for the right-wing parties and the left-wing parties, normally there's a slight edge on the centre-right vote, but in many cases it sort of goes down the middle. But it seems to be something that's happened in modern politics is, you know, if that happens, if there's a sort of stop reform coalition, I would venture that if you were to superimpose that on the supposed earnings demographic, you would find that it would be everybody versus the working class, quite frankly, because it seems to me that the right wing of politics is now the voice of the traditional working classes, whereas the left wing side of politics seems to appeal more and more and more to those with, let's say, luxury ideologies who want to talk pronouns and want to talk open borders. Is it all wonderful because they're not living at the sharp edge of it? Do you think my analysis is right, or are you more in line with what Sebastian says, which is there's a positive case to be made?
No, 100% agree with you, Alex. I think Labour now represent London and the areas outside of London, the sort of home counties. They don't represent working class people up north. They fail to understand this during Brexit, and they still don't quite get it with their own voters, the people who vote traditional Labour voters. I think they're so distant away from them that what they actually want and what they actually need, that they're just so far away, and they're just stuck with this. What people think in London's really important, what a lot of the mainstream journalists think is important. That's not what everyday Brits care about. Their priorities are not the same. So you look at some of the things that you mentioned there when it comes to pronouns, when it comes to talking about net zero as much as they do, or climate change as much as they do. The most Brits, I think, is quite straightforward. Can you make their life better on a day-to-day basis? And that, I think, is the most important thing for most people. But I think in general, there's been a massive shift to the left. We talk a lot about left and right wing, but I feel like the last 10, 20 years, we have seen a shift to the left, whether it's the Conservative Party. You know, taxes were raised by a so-called right-wing party to levels that we've never seen before. There's nothing right-wing about that. There's nothing right-wing about having uncontrolled migration like we've had for the last 10, 20 years. Again, a lot of that was under a allegedly right-wing government. I think right now, if you say something along the lines of a man is a man, a woman is a woman, we should control the borders, that's now considered right-wing. 20 years ago, that was just common sense. That's just middle ground. Normal, a Labour person would say this, a Conservative person would say this. But now the reality is so different, where anything, it feels like that's remotely commonsensical is now considered right-wing, or even worse, far right. So, you look at the rise of DEI jobs again. You go back 20 years ago, this would never be the case. You look at the examples of even Obama, some of the things he used to say as a so-called left-leaning president. That was a man who regularly talked about mass deportations were important, talking about controlling his borders, talking about how he won't allow illegal aliens into the country. If he said that now as a person, he'd be absolutely crucified by the Democratic Party, same as if he was part of the Labour Party. So I think there's been a real shift to the left in general in across politics. And I look at reform, and I think they're just saying a lot of middle grounded, basic common sense stuff, to be honest.
I mean, but this is interesting, actually, because earlier on we were saying, what is working class? And I want to put to you, Sebastian, what is left wing? Because actually, I think that, Sunil's making a good point there, that things that were just happily centrist about 10 years ago are now considered fascistic. But I wouldn't say it's sort of shifted to the left, because if you go back even further, the original Labour Party were the Brexiteers. The original Labour Party were the social conservatives who understood what Jeff going down the working class men's pub thought about society. The original Labour Party now would have been the original Labour Party who were concerned about mass migration because of the impact on workers' wages. So what is left wing these days? What is the Labour Party?
Yeah, you're right that in the 100+ years that the Labour Party has existed, there are some ways in which it's changed. Of course, every party would say the same about themselves, but there are some fundamentals as well. And to me, that is about making sure that there is a floor below which nobody falls. And when you see things like raising the minimum wage and reinstating or scrapping, rather, the two-child benefit cap, I see those as really left-wing, really progressive policies that help people who are lower earners. And it was disappointing disappointing to see Reform and the Tories opposing both of those measures. So there are still things that Labour are doing that they would always have done, even 100 years ago, that are still considered very progressive. And I think many lower earners would really appreciate that, having a bit more money in your pocket, being able to support your child, and seeing children not fall into poverty, and equally looking at measures like taxing private school fees. I think, look, if you are a Labour supporter and you have your child in private school, you will understand that you are one of the lucky ones who can afford to do that, and hopefully would willingly pay the extra. And if you're not, you're seeing money going from people who can afford to give it and who are giving their children an unfair advantage, and that is being brought into the public pot and could be used elsewhere. So there are still a lot of progressive ideas that this government is bringing in, and that's why I'm really enthusiastic to support them.
Funny, isn't it? Sir Keir Starmer benefited from going to a fee-charging school. It became a fee-charging school during his tenure there, and he got a bursary. Interesting. I wonder how that school is faring under Labour Party's proposals, and whether other people will have the same sort of option for social mobility. Gonna have to say goodbye to both of you, I'm afraid. It's time for another break. Time marches on, but thank you to Sebastian and to Sunil there.